Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch, and if you're looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 46 of A Series of Death. Trembor parked in the lot by the park. Says it was the last place he knew his brother had been. It was one of the larger parks, and while not officially a no-predation zone, Trembor saw the males and females making sure everyone was safe. Most were predator, with a few of the larger prey species helping. Families came here, and this community had the cohesiveness to see to it everyone was safe, not having to worry about a predator jumping out from behind a tree to eat one of the adults meant the parents could let the cubs run around carelessly. He watched from inside the car for a few minutes, remembering his wrestling and running around he'd enjoyed in places like this during his cubhood. His family hadn't had to worry about the inerrant predator. When lions went to the park, there were enough of them no one considered approaching unannounced. He'd heard stories of impromptu meals taking place when someone tried it, but he didn't remember them. He stepped out of his car and immediately attracted the attention of the closest watchers, a tiger, a hyena, and a longhorn bull. He expected they knew all the irregulars, and without cubs of his own, he stood out even more. He located the area by the large oak his father said he'd parked, and after sniffing around it, found his brother's scent. It was faint, the wind and other people's scent dispersing it, but there was enough of it Trembor figured that unless his brother had tried to hide it, he'd be able to follow the trail to him. Of course, he couldn't force his brother to come back with him when he found him. The law was that if someone couldn't be reached for 24 hours, the enforcers could be contacted and they would look into it. Those were low priority cases, and in these days of interconnectivity, losing touch was difficult. He could have brought them in when Bo blocked him, but Tremor preferred solving his own problems. And now, his brother's involvement with criminals meant any enforcer looking into his whereabouts might get the idea to use him to bring them down, putting his brother in further danger. Not to say the chances they might uncover that what Tremor had done to ensure his brother's freedom. His brother stayed to the edge of the park, and while Tremor felt eyes following him, none of the watchers approached him. So long as his attention was outside the park, they wouldn't care what he did. The anger in his brother's scent remained for longer than he'd expected. Whatever the argument had devolved into, his brother's couldn't cool down from it. So much for engendering an atmosphere of support, Dad, he grumbled. Bo made it to the other side of the park before his anger cooled enough. Trevor lost its scent, and he noticed a second scent mixed in. Male, not sexually interested in his brother. At first, he thought it was simply the two of them heading in the same direction, but they both turned to head towards another of the parking lot, this one less busy, so he located the spot the car had been parked in. Not that it told him much. He checked the time. The scents were too recent to work out an accurate time frame, but based on when Bo had walked out of their father's car, they could have left close to 30 minutes ago. He called Torum. Dad, are you at Bo's house? You did ask me to come here, his father replied. Trevor rubbed his face. His father wasn't cooling down quickly either. Since you aren't telling me Bo's there, he hasn't arrived yet. Is he on his way? The impatience was clear. The cubs couldn't be causing him problems, could they? His father loved all his grandcubs. Not that it meant things were always easy, as he'd been reminded by the wolf. Great. He'd been doing so well not letting him intrude. Hopefully, he got in a car with some other male. I'm hoping it means he's getting a ride home. I think you're giving your brother too much credit. So that was what had Torum annoyed. He finally realized it made things worse. Is there anything you or the enforcers can do? Torum asked. I'm going to ask around. Someone's going to have noticed Bo. Maybe they know who he left with. Torum let out a slow breath. I shouldn't have been the one to pick him up. I thought I could have a reasoned conversation with him, explain the risk he was putting on his family by continuing to gamble. You two share a temper, Dad. Why do you think we all either get between the two of you or run as far as we can? His father chuckled. Still, your brother overreacted. I'm not laying the blame on. Still, your brother overreacted. I'm not laying the blame on him, son. I'm just saying I don't think anything I said warranted him starting to scream at me about minding my business. And once he started, I couldn't stop myself from yelling back. That sense gone, Dad. There's no point continuing sniffing about, especially because his father didn't know the real problem at this point. I'll let you know what I find out. I'm going to bring Aralex and his ensign home with me. So when you find that brother of yours, take him there. Sure thing, Dad. He disconnected. He'd make sure the females were there before that. Unfortunately, he didn't know where his mothers would fall on with this argument, so he was going to need a lot of backup. He headed for the closest watcher, one of the largest bear he'd seen. She stepped in his direction the instant he began moving and met him at the edge of the grass. Can I help you with something? She asked, looking down at him. I'm looking for my brother. He walked by here about half an hour ago, met up with some other male. Did you happen to notice them? She studied him, then took out her pad. Harim, you and Fenwick were in the northwest corner before I relieved you. Care to come by? I have someone looking for a relative you might have seen. She nodded and put the pad away. They'll be a minute. Two muscular hyena joined them. You're who's got question? The female asked. I'm looking for my brother. He's a lion? The male asked, and was slapped to the back of his head. When was that? She asked. Half an hour, give or take. He walked with another male for part of it, then they headed for a car parked over there. Hare, the male said. She rolled her eyes. His brother's a lion. He slapped the back of her head. The male he was with. He pointed to a table by the edge. After he and the lion talked in the car, he went and sat for a bit, then got back in the car and drove off with the lion. He just left my brother in the car? The lion shrugged. I was making sure the hare didn't do nothing to cause trouble. Maybe the lion got out and laughed. He caught the hand before she slapped him again. Probably not. Do you know what kind of car it was? Blue, the male answered. Was he someone you knew? She shook her head. Never saw him before. Why'd you let me talk if you knew about him? The male asked. Can't slap you when you stay silent. Don't stop Mom, the mare grumbled, turning and walking away. Mom's Mom, the female said, following him. She slaps everyone. Me too. Trevor watched them leave, then shook himself. Hyena families are weird. Tell me about it, the bear said, and he startled. How had he forgotten she was there? He caught his breath. Thanks for the help. Hope it does. She turned and stepped further into the park and went back to watching him as he walked to the sidewalk. This was a dead end. Bo had left with some random male but wasn't home. Didn't mean his brother was off gambling or that the hare had something to do with the criminal gang. Maybe Bo had offered to pay for food and as thanks for the ride. Maybe the only reason the hare had left his brother alone was that Bo still needed to settle down after the argument. He looked toward the picnic table before turning and heading back to his car, then stopped, noticing the rock on it holding something in place. Curious, he headed there. An envelope was under the stone. Lifting it, he saw his name written in a blocky script using dark ink. His hackle rose as he picked it up and caught the scent of blood. He sniffed the envelope to be sure. The ink was blood, and the hare's scent was thick on the envelope. Thick and familiar. There was something light in it. He shifted as he tipped the envelope to smell it. He opened an end with a claw and an ID fell in his hand. Bo's ID. He stared at it uncomprehendingly. Why would some hare leave his brother's ID for him? Why write the name in blood? How had he even known his name? Had Bo told him? A hare. Why did that bother him? Why was the scent familiar? An ID left on a dresser. Marlot flicking his ID at him angrily after Trembor stopped him from killing a hare in enforcer uniform. The same hare who had knocked him out and poorly tied him up. was where he knew the scent from. He looked around for his brother for any trace where he'd gone. His brother had left with the male who'd attacked Trembor. There was no way that was a coincidence. What had the wolf said about the hare? About why he had to stop him? He cursed. He couldn't remember. Maybe he had said nothing and it had been in the tone. The need to stop someone. Maybe it was just Marlot pissed that Trembor wouldn't be the grateful rescue he wanted him to be. Stop it! He snapped. Whatever the reason, the fact was Bo had left with that same hare. How was Trembor going to find them? He couldn't follow the car's scent. Even Marlot with his vaunted course wasn't that good. He looked at the stores on the other side of the road, looking into the parking lot. One of them would have seen something. He had the car's color. That was the start. Looking at the security record, he'd find it. He stepped toward them and stopped. Under what authority? This wasn't his territory. There wasn't even a body involved. Calling in enforcers wouldn't help. They didn't have the level of authority an RI on a case had. They'd need a warrant, which would take time. He ran again. Fuck it. If it wasn't like the people working the stores wouldn't know whose territory this was and that he wasn't on a case. He'd shove his ID in their face and force them to give him access to the camera feeds, and consequences be damned. He realized he had his pad in hand with a number entered. He stared at it, then erased it with a snarl. Breaking the law was one thing, but he was nowhere near desperate enough to call that wolf yet. And that concludes chapter 46 of A Series of Death. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story as well as the other books in the series, they're available at all major e-retailers. If you want a different way of supporting me, it's on my Patreon, where you can also get access to just about everything else I've written. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.